To get started, could you just tell us a bit more about your background, please?
Yeah, for sure. So I guess the relevant background is that when I was a young kid, my mind was really messy. What I mean is I had all these well, I was diagnosed with OCD, so I had all these tendencies like before bed, I had to uh, touch every corner of the room in a certain order, and I had these kind of repetitive rituals, I guess you'd call them, that I had to do and before I felt okay, going about my day. And that was just really hard to live with. It was like hard to live with my own mind, which sounds kind of crazy because it's like, well, you are your own mind. But there was like this little voice in my head that was telling me I had to do certain things before, everything would be all right. And yeah, so I was diagnosed with obsessive compulsive disorder, and then, was seeing a therapist for that, and later was diagnosed with ADHD as well, which just basically meant I couldn't really sit still in class, which I think is kind of like, just basically I was like a typical adolescent male. But yeah, so my mind was messy, and I was always interested in figuring out what was going on in there. And so when I went to college, uh, I started taking some psychology classes, and that wasn't really explaining what was going on in my mind, to be honest. It was like interesting material, but once I discovered meditation, I was just discovered it on a podcast. Tim Ferriss, this guy interviews a lot of successful people, and he said 90% of these really successful individuals, like Arnold Schwarzenegger, Jamie Foxx, just people that I admired, they had meditation practices. So I figured I'd give it a shot, because to me that was the first time I'd heard it, not in the context of being this kind of hippie or woo woo thing, and it just sounded like something that could actually train the mind. And as soon as I started getting into meditation, man, it was like, how come this tool isn't available to more people? This is really revolutionary. This is completely changing the way that I experience the world. The surface level benefits come first, like, the stress reduction and the initial things that get pitched to you, like, oh, you feel, a little more compassionate towards other people, your attention's a little better, etc. But then it's like peeling back layers of an onion, and you're just going deeper and deeper into your mind. And that was really interesting to me. And then also discovering that there were so many different methods. It's not just this boring thing like I kind of thought it was. There was actually like over 800 different techniques, and that was really cool, because I feel like I'm just experimenting on my own mind and like figuring out what works and how this is affecting and changing me in great ways. And yeah, so I went from college, I went to work in finance. I was working at a private equity firm, so we were just investing in businesses, and I found out pretty quick that that's not how I wanted to spend my life. And so I was going on these meditation retreats, and uh, yeah, eventually that just got me so interested in, I decided I wanted to try to make this my livelihood, or at least like explore it very seriously. So I quit my job and went to Asia. I went to Bali and did a 300-hour meditation teacher training. And so this was just, a lot of, this was really high doses of meditation, really going in deep, completely unplugged from the phone for a month. I wasn't pretty much consuming any information. This was the first time, and since I was a toddler, probably, that I hadn't consumed any info. And so my mind just kind of like opened up, like all these, it just felt very clean and clear. And from there, I went on some longer retreats into the mountains to meditate with monks and do some longer. We were sitting and meditating for like 16 hours a day, or we would alternate sitting and walking, an hour here, an hour there. And then I came back to the US and did some other courses like the MBSR, meditation-based stress reduction, and some of the Goenka retreats where it's a similar kind of intense meditation, and started FitMind, which is what I'm working on now, a company that's bringing meditation to more folks under more of a secular and scientific lens.
Very cool. It sounds like quite a journey you've been on. I'd be curious to learn more about what it was like to meditate with those monks in. You said it was it in the mountains in where was it?
Yeah, that was in Bali in the mountains. It was pretty intense. I mean, one of the things that kind of always was tough for me to get over was just how, when you enter this world of trying to seriously learn meditation, there is a lot of dogma or well, religion. So it's not to say, so I'm respectful of these religious beliefs, but for me, when there's people around me, for example, in this case in Bali, they were very Buddhist, so they were bowing down to this statue of Buddha, that was and then there was a lot of like chanting of stuff that the English translation made it clear that we were, praising this like thing. And I was like, well, like I'm not a Buddhist, but I like the techniques, they seem to be working. So, I would kind of just quietly sit in a corner and not do that stuff because I didn't feel comfortable doing it. But then the training itself still works. And that's what's great about it is like, in the historical Buddha apparently said, don't take anything I say on faith. This is not, he wasn't trying to start a religion. He just said, come and see for yourself. These techniques really work and they train your mind to be happier. And it's good in the beginning, it's good in the middle, it's good in the end. So like, you'll see that these work for you. And that's what I saw very clearly there was, this was giving me insights into my mind that, I feel like I learned more on those retreats than 4 years of college, just about myself and how my mind works. And someone very wise once said, probably many people wise meditation teachers have said this, but it's in this book by Chuladasa. He said, if you want to get to know your own mind, sit down and observe it. And it's true. You can read a psychology textbook or you can read about neurons firing, and that stuff fascinates me. But if you want to understand yourself, sit down and observe your mind, and you quickly realize how neurotic it is initially, and then how much training it requires for you to really feel content and feel kind of happy. It's like, yeah, I'll stop there. I don't want to go on a rant.
No worries, no worries. Well, that must have been quite a jump. You did your BA at Yale and then you worked in finance and then you quit and you went to Asia and you studied meditation. Like, what did the people in your life think about this? Were they supportive? Did they think you'd gone crazy? Like, what was the circumstances around that decision? It must have been such a leap to take.
Yeah, they probably thought I'd gone a little crazy, to be honest. No, my parents were really supportive though, because I think they heard the passion and understood the logic behind it too. Like, I was explaining to them a lot of the evolutionary psychology, like, hey, look, our minds are really maladapted for the modern world. I really think that we got to train our minds, and meditation's been kind of misbranded, at least in the US and probably a lot of the Western world, as like this hippie thing. And I explained to them, no, like that's just a misrepresentation, and kind of there's a lot of misconceptions around it, right? But I could explain that to my family and they understood. I think a lot of my friends, like the friends who weren't true friends, it's like I haven't been able to relate to them as much. And I've changed a lot too, but it was certainly a big change. And like, I don't think there was one moment. It was kind of like slowly over time where I took on a new belief system. And that's kind of the main thing, is like, I hopped out of a belief system. I was in a belief system, which is like the framework through which you view the whole world. And I hopped into, like, that kind of changed. And so that completely changed me and my outlook on life and everything. And yeah, so
So
I'm forgetting what the original question was. I'm sorry.
I was just saying it must have been quite a big leap, to leave finance and go study meditation in the East. But
Mm.
I'd like to briefly touch now about the benefits of meditation, both short term, medium term, and long term. Could you talk a bit more about that? Like, in your own life, how has it affected just your own quality of life, I suppose?
Yeah, I mean, it's been it's had a huge impact. And when people ask about the benefits of meditation, there's so many good studies out there that show the changes in the brain and the physiological benefits, decreasing blood pressure, decreasing inflammation. It's good for your immune system. It helps you sleep better. You feel more focused. You feel more energized. You can better handle negative emotions, and all these things are true. I think the biggest benefits, though, come from things that don't get marketed as often. And I'll give two examples. One is just a more of an appreciation for kind of the moment to moment in life. There was a 2010 Harvard study that showed that we spend 47% of our time lost in thought, like mind wandering. And I think it's actually higher than that. The study was just sending out phone notifications and asking people if they were present. But the truth is, if we just observe, it's like, how often am I not just thinking about the future and the past? And the truth is, I think we spend probably closer to 90% of our day, replaying past memories or thinking about future plans. At least I did. That was my default before. And the truth, that would be fine if, it's fine to think about the future and past. I think it's great for idea generation. But the issue is a lot of those thoughts are negative on average. And that's just the way our brains are evolutionarily skewed. So, our brains are not these happy-go-lucky things. They were trying to keep us alive. So the brain is very much, skewed towards, for example, if you got 8 compliments in a day and one little insult or one little jab, you would remember the jab. Like, that's what would keep replaying in your mind. And so we replay these awkward encounters in the hallway, or we replay this terrible memory that keeps coming up, and that can cause depression. I mean, depression is like this story that keeps replaying. And then same thing with anxiety. We're just anticipating these catastrophes all the time. You lose your car keys and you just start picturing all the worst things, and then they were in your pocket, but you spend like 5 minutes just suffering, like playing out these awful scenarios. And so meditation has allowed me to see through those stories more and more and become more present and recapture that half of, or maybe it was 90% of my life that was previously spent just like lost in this kind of storyland, and a lot of those being bad times and certainly not in touch with what was happening. So that increased my quality of life. And it's always a work in progress. It's not like to say that I'm this like perfectly present person now, but I think it has gotten a lot more enjoyable just to live. And the other example I bring up is the gap between stimulus and response, which is you have, there's this famous saying, I think it was Viktor Frankl, he said, between stimulus and response is your ability to choose. And, that's what makes you human, is that ability to choose, kind of paraphrasing there. So we have more of an ability to choose when we realize when the stimulus has happened. We can realize that in action and then be like, all right, I'm not going to do my conditioned response there. I'm going to choose what my higher self or my more ideal self would want to do. And so an example that would be, you're in the car and someone cuts you off, and the stimulus is someone cuts you off, you're angry now, and the response would be to honk. And instead you can have that little circuit break, but you have to be mindful in that moment, right? You have to realize that you've been triggered, and then you have to then choose to make the response you actually want to. And I think meditation allows that to happen more and more, because you're very aware of how your mind works, or you're becoming more and more aware of how your mind works. And that sounds like a small thing, but so many times throughout our lives, like, we have conditioned responses and they need to be kind of recoded. And so meditation has allowed me to get off of autopilot more and really sped up that recoding process.
For sure. I was listening to your podcast earlier, and I'm going to get the stat wrong, but it was something like human beings on average have like 65,000 thoughts per day. I don't know if that's the right number. And about 95% of those thoughts are automatic, and we've already had them, So is the power of meditation is that it gives you more awareness about what these thoughts are, and then you can begin to focus on more productive thoughts and better thoughts. And if you're always thinking about negative things, then it allows you to override those thoughts and replace them with more positive ones. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, so I think that's half of it. So, or I think that's part of it. So, like, part of it is changing your relationship to thoughts for sure. Um, and yeah, those are the kind of the stats that get thrown out. Although recently I did some more digging, and I'm not, apparently it was like 70,000, 60, or somewhere between 60 and 70,000 thoughts a day. And the truth is that came from someone who was just kind of like throwing out a number. The point is we have a ton of thoughts a day. And yeah, the 95%, how are you going to measure that? But yeah, a lot of those thoughts are the same as the ones we had the day before. And so that, let's say those are kind of the autopilot thoughts. And the, yeah, so those are just kind of automated programs running on your mind. Now, in meditation, you're not trying to like erase your thoughts or eliminate your thoughts. And I think that's a common misconception and frustrates a lot of folks who are trying to learn, is that they sit there and they're like, come on, like, how come my thoughts won't go away? And of course, that just makes it worse. And what you're doing is changing your relationship with thoughts. So as soon as you notice a thought, as soon as I notice, like, oh, there's that like loop again of like, it's worried about what does that person think of me. And now I've gone into like, it wants to take me on a little story train where now I take that thought and it leads to another one. Now I start going into some scenario. So that happens less and less. So I notice the thought come up, and then it's like, oh, it's gone. It's like as soon as you point your awareness at it, notice that it's a thought and it's not you in that moment. It's just a thought that came up. Then it doesn't have any power over you. It can't take you for some story. It can't lead you into some negative emotion. If you want to get really angry, start thinking about something that pisses you off, and you'll get angry. And so your thoughts have that power to completely change your mood and completely just capture you into some direction or another. And so you're not necessarily trying to eliminate them. It's just you recognize them as thoughts, and suddenly they don't have the power to to do that anymore. And so that's kind of the meditation piece. And then there's more of a psychology piece, which I think is important to also implement with regards to thoughts. And that is kind of, cognitive behavioral therapy is a good example, where in that example, you're noticing your thoughts, but then you're actually trying to change like the underlying beliefs. And I think that's useful to do in tandem. So while meditation is changing your relationship to those thoughts, and you can have a ton of negative thoughts, but you would just realize that you're outside of them and they wouldn't have that effect on you. Then there's other methods that you can use to actually like kind of positive psychology stuff that you can use to change the nature of those thoughts. And that's actually, a lot of the meditation traditions have also taught some of those same techniques that are popularized in the West. But I think you kind of want a combination of both, ideally. Like, you want to work on your core beliefs. You want to work on, noticing what kind of underlying motivations and intentions are causing those thoughts to be the ones that are, spinning through your mind. But you're not necessarily trying to just stop thoughts altogether, or like only have positive thoughts or something like that. It's more of just, it's incredible how this works just by becoming aware of it, by shining like the awareness flashlight on your thoughts. Something about that just naturally kind of, you recognize the neurotic stories, and so they tend to go away more.
I think one of the most freeing moments of my life was when I just had that realization that I'm not my thoughts. For me, that was like a big moment, and like that really, my life was a lot different before and after that experience. I've seen you speak before about the ego, and you talk a little bit about the neuroscience of the ego. Could you talk a bit more about that and explain what the neuroscience of our sense of self actually is?
Mm. Yeah, I think it's important first, just that when I'm using the term the ego, I'm talking about the self-referential thinking. So that term in psychology, I think it's used in a lot of different ways. So I'm not talking about like the Freudian sense of the ego, because that's something that we actually need to kind of like balance out our id and our superego. But I'm talking about the ego in the sense of self-referential thoughts. So you can think of it as like that mini me, like that voice in your head that's like, you know, um, always chattering, and just that's what I'm calling the ego here. And it turns out that, and that's often who we mistaken ourselves to be. I think for most of our lives, we think we're this little homunculus, which is like a little mini person, like living somewhere behind the eyes, between the ears, just like located in there. And that's just what it kind of feels like. We're riding around and we're like this little mini voice in the head. And that is constructed from we have to think about how those stories are constructed, and it comes from a very small sliver of reality that we can perceive, and then of that, a very select number of memories that start to form your sense of self and the story that you're telling yourself. In other words, you can't remember everything that's happened to you in life, but your brain is what's gonna stick are the points that were like emotionally salient somehow, or like contributed to your sense of self. And so you can think of it like if someone threw a bunch of sticky notes against like a telephone pole, and just a few of them happened to stick because those were like the really sticky ones. That's kind of what's happened with your memories and with your sense of self. It's like certain things had just kind of stuck, and those became like who you think of yourself as. Um, and we can all think, if you have like a very traumatic memory, that will encode this sense of self that's, can it can be really harmful. But also, if you've had some great memories and a lot of praise, that might really pump up your ego. Or if you get a new job title, that might change your sense of self. And so it's just this kind of story that you're telling yourself about who you are. And so I'm not saying like have no story, or like my advice isn't to like completely shed your ego or something like that. It's more like recognizing that it's just a story, and so you can eliminate the pieces of it that are harmful. And yeah, the neuroscience, they're like related to this kind of self-referential thinking, is that the default mode network is really active when we're doing this type of thinking. And this is they're connected brain regions that kind of light up in the fMRI scanner when you're doing this self-referential thinking. And that shuts down when experienced meditators go into meditation. It's quieted down in general, just even when they're not meditating. And it's actually the same network that quiets down when people take a psychedelic drug, which enables them to really get out of feeling like this mini me and have these big experiences that can be life-changing. So getting out of this, David Foster Wallace is this author that I love, and he said, it's my responsibility to do everything I can to get out of my default pattern of being completely self-centered. Again, kind of a paraphrase there, but his point was, we naturally are all day are just going me, 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 me. How does this relate to me? What about, I, and it's all like part of the story we're telling ourselves. And so the more we can see that for what it is and get out of that, default mode network way of thinking, then, it becomes more pleasant. We become a lot better people for those around us, as we start to care about their needs more. And it eliminates a lot of our suffering, because almost all of our mental suffering comes because we're thinking about how does something relate to me? Like, how does that harm my sense of self? And we're trying to protect this little sense of self all the time. Like, if something is potentially insulting to it, then, you can just see your defense systems flare up, and like it needs to defend that like little mini me that we've built up. So again, it's not trying to get rid of the mini me entirely. It's just like seeing where that is causing a lot of problems, so that you can kind of, again, just shine the light of awareness on it, become aware of like what's causing that mini me to flare up, or where the story is really negative. When the story gets really negative, that can lead to depression, and that can lead to, anorexia. That's a story too, that, it's like, I need to be skinnier. I need to be skinnier. So these are stories that can become, you can see on the extreme ends, they cause mental health disorders. But even if, you don't have a disorder of some sort or haven't been diagnosed, we all have these stories that need work, I think, to some extent.
100%. Just going back to David Foster Wallace, I've been thinking a lot about one of like a metaphor he uses a lot recently. It's there's two fish swimming, and an older fish walks past and he says, "How's the water, boys?" And they swim on and they say, "What's water?" And he's kind of referring to the fact that I think it's something to do with consciousness and the fact that we're all just like having this strange experience and we don't quite understand it. Um,
Yeah.
I wanted to talk about the psychology of meditation, and you've wrote an article for the Weekend University actually, and you talk about three programs of the mind. Could you tell us a bit more about those and why these are relevant for meditation?
Yeah, this is how I've come to understand the mind. This is the framework that I use for understanding the mind. Excuse me. There's these three programs that are running on our minds. And so program A is our evolved psychology. And this is the predispositions that we come with from birth. And this is why you're able to learn a language. It's like you have this wiring. We all, as humans, have this wiring that sets us up to be able to progress at certain skills. It also is the reason that you're afraid of snakes, but not afraid of texting and driving. It's predisposing us towards certain ways of interacting with the world based on 600 million years of the nervous system evolving. So evolution is very, very intelligent, and it's not going to put you into the world as a blank slate. That way of thinking about the mind is no longer valid. It's clear that we come predisposed to interact with the world in certain ways. Excuse me. And so some of that system is really good. We want to be able to learn languages, and we want to be able to relate to other humans well and have these social um, systems in place and all that. But there's also a ton of evolutionary baggage that we actually is no longer helpful and causes us a lot of suffering. And so, for example, we have a tendency for in-group love. Like we're good at bonding with others that are like us and kind of in our in-group circle. But we also have a tendency for out-group discrimination because of our tribal evolution. So if someone looks different or they're identified with a different group, they are a member of a rival sports team, then we actually treat them like they're a rival tribe that's competing for resources. So that's just one example. There's other examples of just, we're innately like a little bit greedy or just like concerned with our own survival and all these things. So some of that program A is laying a good foundation, but then part of it is also stuff that we probably isn't so helpful in the modern world, where we're really fortunate and we're not, scrounging for, those of us who are fortunate aren't scrounging for our next meal and trying to survive. And it's more, how can we rewire that system, which I'll get to. So program A is the foundation, evolved psychology. Program B is our conditioning, and that's more behaviorism, BF Skinner. So that's how we've been conditioned over a whole lifetime, according to approach and avoidance. You put your hand on the hot stove and you quickly learn that you shouldn't do that anymore. You have, someone yells at you and you start to get a little bit afraid of that type of person or whatever it is. You're just learning throughout your life, depending on how you're interacting with different people and places and concepts. And yeah, so that's our conditioned mind. And again, a lot of the conditioning's helpful. I don't want to have to relearn how to swing a tennis racket once I've already learned that skill. It just gets the brain it's called myelination. So the brain basically automates that habit, makes the neurons fire quicker and more often and more easily. And it's great that we don't have to relearn those skills. Once I've driven to work a couple times, it's nice that I can kind of coast and don't have to be completely thinking about every turn the way that I did when I first learned. But then also a lot of that conditioning is obviously unhelpful because we don't all have perfect upbringings, and we don't we're not conditioned in a way that's like optimizing our happiness. It's just kind of a circumstance of whatever environment we grew up in. And same thing with that sense of self. It's just kind of like this conditioned thing that gets baked into our psychology. So then what I'm calling program C is self-directed neuroplasticity, which is the fancy word for meditation. This is our ability to use the mind to change the brain. So in other words, using your intention to direct your attention in a certain way, which is essentially meditation, in a way such that you're reconditioning it. And it's easier to rewire the conditioned patterns like the program B, because those have been laid more recently. It's harder to reprogram program A because those have evolved over millions of years, and so they're much more baked into the nervous system. But even some studies, like early studies, for example, this one type of meditation called metta has been shown to increase generosity and stuff like that. So we can change both programs. Neither is set in stone. We can start to reprogram the mind. So program C is just your ability to intentionally choose and consciously choose what you're doing in each moment, and not to bring up any like philosophical debate around free will or like who's doing the choosing. This is just like the level of analysis that like the framework I've chosen to view the mind in. And it's really just, again, this isn't like, oh, this is how the mind works. It's more, this is a helpful framework for understanding how how our tendencies get built, how our minds get built, and then how we can actually use our intentions and use meditation to start to reprogram the mind in ways that are really useful.
Very cool. Now, what advice would you give to somebody that they're starting from scratch and they've never meditated before and they want to get into the habit of meditation? What advice would you give to that person?
Yeah, so I think it's really important to, a couple of things. First would be to learn from a good teaching mechanism or teacher. And so I think my fear is like a lot of people, when they first jump into meditation, they'll try one method or they'll get the wrong advice, and then they'll quickly conclude that it's not for them. And so meditation is this umbrella term like exercise. There's many different types of meditation. And this would be like an athlete who tries one sport and decides, well, I'm not a gymnast, so athletics are off the table. I'm not going to exercise. And so I think, let's say you try mindfulness meditation and you're just focused on the breath, and you're like, this is not the method for me. You've tried it a couple times. Try out some other stuff. There's a lot of other techniques out there, and don't give up on it right away. But the other thing is too, like, it's not going to feel great right away necessarily. It's kind of like going to the gym for the first time, and if you've never been in the gym, you might feel awful after a little run on the treadmill, but then soon you become addicted to the endorphins, and then you just need that exercise fix like every day. So some people become addicted to running. And so it's like that, like it feels better the more that you do it, the more that you kind of get your mind in shape, the better it starts to feel. And then just starting really small, starting with what I call a minimum viable commitment, an MVC. So that means what's the most amount that you can meditate on your busiest, most hectic, least motivated day. And maybe that's 2 minutes, and that's great. And then you start there, and you string together how many days can you go 2 minutes. And on a lot of days you might feel like meditating more. You might go for 10 or 15, but just knowing that every day I'm going to sit for at least 2 minutes. And then it's helpful to find, like, getting a regular, just advice about starting a habit, do it in regular time, regular place, so your brain starts to associate that time and place with meditation. So generally it's recommended first thing in the morning or last thing before bed, because those, you'll always have those couple minutes. And yeah, I think if you're like me, you might find you get addicted to it and you start wanting to just sit for longer and longer.
I think that minimum viable commitment is so important, because there's a quote from James Clear. He wrote this book called Atomic Habits, and the quote is basically, every action we take is a vote for the kind of person we want to become. So even if you stick to your 2-minute commitment, you're sort of solidifying this identity that you are someone who meditates. And the more you sort of solidify that identity, the more you want to do it, and the more addictive I think it becomes, So I think that's such great advice, man, honestly. Um, you've got an app called the FitMind meditation app, and it's like basically science-based training for meditation. Could you tell people what the experience is like of actually using this app, and what they could expect to find inside if they were to start using it?
Yeah, so there's a few meditation apps out there. And so you might think, why did the world need another one? And the truth is, when I started meditating, I never really found an app that I was vibing with. And then when I went to and started studying meditation a little more in depth, I found that the apps weren't really teaching it the way that I would have wanted to learn when I started. In other words, for example, Headspace, great company, great founder. I think Andy's from London, isn't he?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. So, great company that, they've brought meditation to a ton of people, and I'm not ragging on them, but they do only teach 3 techniques. They're teaching mindfulness, meditation, body scan, and metta, or loving kindness. And now they've diversified into meditation for sleep and stuff like that. But there's so many different techniques, and a lot of these haven't made their way to the West yet, especially like the Dzogchen Mahamudra stuff. Just like really powerful techniques that haven't made their way to the West. And so I wanted to teach all these. And so first, what I do in the program is I start out really simple. You're just meditating 5 minutes a day, and you build a strong attention, which is what's needed for any type of meditation. Like, you have to be able to pay attention somewhat and not get lost in thought. Otherwise, you'll spend the whole sit, thinking about, whatever it is that's on your mind instead of meditating. But then after building that strong attention, I go into these more, what are traditionally considered advanced methods, these metacognitive methods, and then these kind of what I call deconstructive methods. These are just the categories that scientists have kind of put them into. And then after that core, so there's like a core 30-day training program where I take folks through 25 different techniques. And then I feel like they'll have a really good sense of what's working for them. And then after that, there's a bunch of pro trainings that are just some of them are longer. Some of them are just really interesting techniques that didn't really fit into the core program, like learning how to lucid dream, and these types of just really cool, like what gets me excited, like these breathing techniques that are really changing your physiology. There's one called Tumo breathing that some Harvard scientists were studying these Tibetan lamas and found that they could raise their body temperature by 18 degrees Fahrenheit and dry off wet sheets in the freezing Himalayas, sitting there with nothing else on but a loincloth. And so I learned those methods and I've put them on the app. And because I think that kind of stuff is what really excites me, just how much we can actually train our minds. And so, yeah, I teach all these different techniques. I think there's over 60 different methods, or at least over 55 different techniques right now in the app, and just continuing to add them every week. And then paired with those, what I call trainings, which are the guided meditation lessons, or guided meditations, are lessons. And those are just brief little 3 to 5 minute clips that explain the underlying neuroscience and psychology of meditation. And so if you've just done a certain technique, it would explain how does that train your mind, and then how can you apply that in your real world scenario. Because I think it's really important to understand how the mind works in order to be able to train it and to understand, how you should be bringing this into your everyday life. And then the final feature that I'll mention is just that it's tracking your mental, what we call mental fitness. So you're giving yourself qualitative scores on 4 different measures, and you do that every morning, and it starts to track this chart of kind of how fit your mind is based on your mental energy and your focus and your social connection, and these sorts of measurements, which I think are the real indicators of where you would see progress in meditation. So that's kind of what to expect in the app. And again, find what works for you. You might find that one of these other apps works better for your mind. I built a program that, for me, it's as kind of the skeptical person who needed the science and who wanted to learn a bunch of different techniques. That's what I would have wanted when I started. So that's what I tried to build with FitMind.
Fantastic. You mentioned the Lumo breathing there. Are there any other like surprising meditation techniques that you've come across that would be interesting to share?
Yeah. Yeah. So the breathing stuff is pretty cool. Like the pranayama is the yogic, is what they call this breath work stuff is pretty cool. And there's some techniques in there. Another one. So yeah, this is a really cool one. I've had this guy on my podcast. The guy who teaches this, it's called Headless Way. Have you heard of this?
Never, no.
So Headless Way is this technique that was developed really recently relative to, all these methods have been around for thousands of years, but Headless Way is really, it was developed I think in the 80s by this British philosopher, Douglas Harding. And basically what he realized is you can have this profound shift in awareness just by paying close attention to what your experience looks like from a first person perspective. So the classic instruction is, look out at the world in front of you and, point at an object that's out in front. So right now I'm pointing at like a lamp. It's a few feet away, and you just notice what's there. And just notice what it looks like to observe that object, and then point down at the floor or the table. Notice what's there. And now point at your chest and just notice what's there. Now point back at your head and just notice what do you actually see there. And so the first 100 times I did this, I thought it was really dumb, right? But then what you realize is your conditioning has had you such that you imagine that there's a head there. But from a first person perspective, when I look here, I don't see a head. I just see the world, right? And so this is a good way of, it's what's called a glimpse technique. And there's a lot of these in like Dzogchen and Mahamudra. And it's trying to shift your awareness into they call it natural awareness, where you kind of drop out of this conditioned way of seeing the world, feeling like a mini me in the head. And what can happen to you if you got the key is you got to do this technique enough where eventually you stop being like, oh, this is stupid, there's a head there. You have to get out of that story. But it's essentially what happens is it can tweak your awareness such that you go into this kind of non-dual state, and you can feel like pure awareness through this technique. And this is again, first 50, 100 times I did it, I thought it was dumb, but it was initially taught to me by this neuroscientist. So I kind of trusted that there was probably something there. And then eventually, I was doing it one day and just boom, like I melted away and I was just in this blissful, like, part of everything. So, again, everyone's mind is different. And that's why I think it's great that there's so many little tricks that have developed over the years. And this guy, Douglas Harding, just literally, he was obsessed with the question of who am I? And he kept trying to figure it out. And eventually one day he was actually, what he did was he saw a painting by this guy, Ernst Mark, where he had drawn from the first person perspective what it actually looked like to look out of his head and be drawing. And he realized that this is from a first person perspective how we experience the world, as we're essentially headless, and yet we are kind of imagining that there's a head there. Anyways, so this sounds kind of kooky, but these are just techniques that, again, have worked for a lot of people. And if you just keep exploring with your own mind, you'll find that some of them worked really well for you.
That's really cool. One of the things I'm really curious to try, and I've never done it before, I've been meditating for a while, but I've never actually tried loving kindness meditation. So could you just
Mm.
briefly take us through how that works and how somebody can begin practicing that form of meditation?
Yeah, so loving kindness or metta, or in the program I actually call it emotional priming, because I try to stay away from these terms that I think, at least when I was starting out, I would have been like, loving kindness, like, no, 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 keep me away from the gooey stuff. But no, this is like one of the most powerful techniques. And uh, essentially what you do is so you start by cultivating a feeling of loving kindness for yourself. So you might repeat the phrase, may I be happy, may I be healthy, but you really feel that, and that's hard for a lot of people. And the reason you start with yourself is because a lot of us, especially in the West, are like always beating ourselves up. We actually don't have as much self-love. Um, and so, yeah, you cultivate that feeling, may I be happy, may I be healthy. If it helps, you can like imagine a younger version of yourself, like a cute little kid. May I be happy, may I be healthy. And then you move to someone who's really close to you, like a family member. May they be happy, may a person's name be happy, may they be healthy.
Like one specific individual?
Yeah, one individual. Um, and so you'd spend a minute on just really feeling that, picturing a smile on their face, picturing giving them a hug, whatever helps you really feel that compassion, that loving kindness. And then you'd pick someone who's slightly more distant, maybe a really close friend. And again, you can do as many individuals as you want, but you're just kind of going one person at a time. And then the next group would be someone who's a neighbor, and then you might do a coworker, and then you might do a complete stranger, someone that you came across in the elevator, so, the bus driver or whatever it is. And then you might do, from there, this is more difficult. You would do actually someone who you don't even like. It doesn't have to be the most difficult person in your life, but just someone that, you just kind of a jerk or whatever. May they be happy, may they be healthy. And you can actually start to like generate that feeling for them. Like, yeah, they're just trying to be happy. Maybe they're a little deluded, but may they be happy, may they be healthy. And then from there you go to, from there I like to go to just all beings, may everyone be happy, may everyone be healthy, and just send out those good vibes. And
Okay.
yeah, at the end of doing that for like 10 minutes, I mean, yeah, that'll change. If you do that in the morning, like that'll change the way that you interact with people the rest of the day, guaranteed. Like, you're at the checkout counter and suddenly that person, it's like, yeah, may they be happy and healthy. Like, so.
Awesome, man. Awesome. Another thing I'd like to ask, you've been like obsessed with the subject for what, 3, 4, 5 years now, like quite a long time.
Hmm. Yeah, something like that.
What what are the things that have surprised you most while you're researching it? Like, is there anything that you have come across that just is counterintuitive or something you weren't expecting to find that you found to be true?
Hmm. Yeah, that's a really thoughtful question. Hmm. Yeah, I think just my overall realization that has really sunk in and continued to sink in is just that our minds create our entire reality, like on every level. Um, our beliefs shape how we see the world. Um, we don't see things as they are. We see them as our conditioning and as our worldviews allow us to. And so, for some people, this takes like a big experience to shake, to shake you out of this, like, yeah, like things are, my mind's creating the world. For some people, it takes like a psychedelic experience or like, a tragedy or something. But I think we can get there more systematically in meditation, where you start to realize, like, yeah, my conditioning is just determining everything about how I view the world. And I'm attaching, I'm not seeing that person, I'm seeing the story that I've told myself about them. I'm seeing the concept of them. And so my mind is creating everything. And so that just eventually, that helps you realize that it's really important to train your mind and to at least pay attention to your mind and how it's working, because it's with you all the time. And yeah, I just kind of had this realization that my mind is creating, my entire reality. And I don't think, that's so obvious when I say it now, but it just isn't something that we pay attention to, I think, like, or in the school system, they don't tell you that. Because I think the general misconception, at least that I had, was that you can't change that. You're just, your mind is what it is, and that's who you are. And, what's the big deal? Well, it's like, no, it's not just who you are, that's who you've been conditioned to be, and that's how you've been conditioned to see the world. But you can actually, unless maybe you're really, really happy how you are, but for a lot of us, it's like, there's this kind of baseline discontentment, or like always feeling like we need to do something or get a hit of dopamine. Oh yeah, and that's the other thing that has really sunk in for me, is the difference between pleasure and contentment. Like, I used to think group happiness into one big bucket of like, yeah, I just want to be happy. But then what I started to realize is there's a big difference between pleasure and contentment, like dopamine versus serotonin, kind of the overgeneralization. Like, dopaminergic happiness is like, I need a like on Facebook, I need a thumbs up, I need like a words of encouragement from, the boss or whatever it is. And that's just very temporary. And then your mind needs more of it. And then there's serotonergic contentment, which is like, everything's okay, regardless of external circumstances. Things just feel nice, like here. And so I think we focus more on the dopaminergic happiness in the West. We've like mistaken that for the goal, is like, yeah, I need to like, have get really popular and, get wealthy and all these things are just dopaminergic. They're, I need to eat lots of, sugary foods. All these things give us dopamine. All of them, drugs, just like drugs, that, sugar gives us dopamine, likes on Facebook give us dopamine. And that's not happiness. It's not, in the sense that it's not sustainable. Like, and we see this with celebrities all the time. It's just your mind goes on a hedonic treadmill of needing more and more of that in order to feel happy. Whereas with serotonergic happiness, it's very stable. It's like, you don't need more of it. You don't need your next fix. It's just, it's a much better way of being in the world. So that's become my goal in life, is to aim for that very steady form of, contentment. And I think that's a little more, it's more attainable.
Very cool. Very cool perspective. FitMind seems to be going really strong at the minute. Where are you taking this, Liam? Like, where do you see FitMind in 3 years' time, 5 years' time? Like, what's kind of like the vision for where you're going, if there is one?
Yeah, I mean, I have big plans for FitMind. I'd love to bring it to as many people as possible, and um, my dream is that everyone is training their minds, just as we're focused on our physical bodies right now. A lot of us see exercise as important and diet as important. I'd love if the mind became at least as important as those other things, if not more important, and taught in schools. And so however FitMind can facilitate that is what I am going to do. And so I have a broad vision of, I'd love to get this into schools. I'd love to create even physical locations for FitMind at some point. I'd love for the app to just continue to build out and make this a better and better experience for folks. I want to add in a biofeedback component. And but I also just need to learn a lot more. And so right now FitMind is my whole life pretty much, but that includes me learning as much as I can and really trying to master these techniques so that I can impart them and make sure that I'm really sharing them in the best way possible, communicating them in the best way possible, and really speaking from that experience. So I always try to carve out time for me to go on retreats or go learn from people. And so the next 2 years, I'm finishing my neuroscience master's, and then spending some time probably in the Far East with some of the teachers that I really respect, to try to bring my mind to the next level and continue to train so that I can really, have FitMind impart the best teachings out there in a really genuine way.
Very cool. Very cool. I was just going to say there before you go, what one belief, if you could get one belief inside the head of everybody in the world, what would it be?
Yeah. Oh, that's a good one. Yeah. Well, I think maybe just, I mean, on a very surface level, I would just say the belief in the importance of training our minds and the fact that it's very, very possible. And yeah, happiness lies inside. Like, that's not something that someone needs to take on faith, though. They can find that out for themselves. But I guess the initial belief so that they would go practice. Yeah.
I think the big thing I've taken from, studying your work and preparing for this interview is that the mind can sort of be compared to like a muscle, in the sense that it can be trained and it can be strengthened. And I think that's such an empowering thing, or such an empowering way to look at your own brain and your own mind, because it means you can change. And just going back to what you were saying earlier about, your brain creates reality. Like, if you want to live in a beautiful world, like, the best place to start is by creating a beautiful mind, and the work you're doing is helping people to do that, man. So I just want to acknowledge you for it, and just it's pretty incredible. So just keep going. Where can people find you online, Liam, and where can people learn more information about the app?
Yeah. So my website is fitmind.co. So FITMIND.co. And the app's on the Apple App Store, FitMind, one word. And yeah, I don't know if people are on Twitter, but Liam_McClintock is the best place to, if you wanted to give me a shout or something. But yeah, the website is good for finding out more about FitMind. And yeah, thanks so much. I'm really glad that you share my vision. And yeah, just that part about training them, like the mind. Yeah, it's truly a muscle. It's truly a muscle. And I do think it's so empowering. I mean, that's what got me so excited, was that light bulb went off when I realized, man, like, you can really train the mind. It's not just, you're not like tricking yourself into believing something by repeating it a bunch of times. You're literally slowly, and it doesn't happen all at once, but you're slowly changing the entire way that you perceive the world. That's pretty cool.
100%. Well, Liam, it's been great to talk. Thank you so much for taking the time, and we'll speak soon. All right.
Yeah, great to talk. Yeah, thank you.